Can Ferrari really compete for the title in 2025, or are we witnessing the beginning of the end of another false red hope? Today we are going to disassemble what really happens in Maranello, with data, context, and the technical analysis that no one dares to show you. Ferrari sought to close the gap that separated them from McLaren and Red Bull. However, the complexity of the SF25 has evident that the problem goes far beyond individual talent. The car presents an extremely narrow operational window. It is a car that can be competitive, yes, but only if a millimeter configuration is achieved, something that in a sprint-placed calendar and reduced practice sessions becomes a monumental challenge. And it is that Ferrari, despite the advances, does not seem to have developed a robust car before changing conditions. In Australia, Hamilton's lack of trust with the car was naked. The British, accustomed to stable machines in Mercedes, had to modify his braking style and adaptation to the SF25 steering wheel, without achieving immediate results. What in theory was going to be a promising new era, it became an accelerated lesson of humility. For his part, Charles Leclerc, although more familiar with the tool he has in hand, has shown irregular performance. Brilliant in classification in certain circuits, blurred in mixed conditions or with a compromised strategy. The beginning of the season has been brutally demanding for Ferrari. To the technical demands of the car is added the meteoric evolution of rivals such as McLaren, which has not only consolidated a competitive car in all aspects, but has also established a strategic environment that maximizes points every time. In comparison, Ferrari seems to be caught in a constant struggle to understand his car, while others are already maximizing their potential. And the most worrying is not only the performance gap, but the rhythm at which the rivals evolve against the slow reaction in Maranello. In this context, it is not enough to have two first-level pilots. Ferrari needs a deep structural change that goes beyond specific aerodynamic improvements. You need to recover an operational culture that prioritizes adaptation, impeccable execution under pressure, and technical leadership that does not depend on finding the perfect weekend to be competitive. Because in a Formula One where the margin of error is infimo, Ferrari cannot continue waiting for its history to weigh more than its current performance. His place at the top is no longer an acquired right, it is a position to be won career at career. The Miami 2025 Grand Prix arrived as a critical test for Ferrari, not only because of the need to reverse a narrative of inconsistent results, but so this urban circuit represents within the calendar. A hybrid track with long lines, closed curves, and a surface that punishes without mercy the lack of aerodynamic balance. In this context, what Ferrari achieved in the sprint classification was more revealing than the cold numbers could suggest. Place Charles Leclerc in 6th position and Lewis Hamilton in 7th, on an extremely adjusted grille, represented much more than a modest result. It was a sign that even with limitations, SF25 can respond if the conditions are minimally favorable. The key detail of this action was in the context prior to the classification session. Ferrari arrived in Miami after a disappointing weekend in China, where the car failed to enter pace because of its difficulty working on consistent thermal windows. Leclerc, particularly, had been criticized for his classification performance during that event and in Japan. However, in Miami, Monegasco faced an almost impossible challenge. He could only take a quick turn in free training before losing control of the car in curve 16 and suffer a loss of clutch. Despite this, he returned in the classification with an aggressive mentality, taking advantage of every centimeter of the layout and extracting the best of a car that still does not behave predictably. He achieved a time of 1:26,808, leaving less than 4/10 of the pole. Hamilton, meanwhile, showed a constant progression throughout Friday. Although his free session was cleaner than his partner's, he found himself again with the difficulties of finding total confidence in the rear axle of the SF25, especially in the traction phases. His time of 1:27,030 placed it just behind Leclerc, confirming that the car had competitive potential, but demanded a surgical pilot. The difference of half a second with the pole of Kimi Antonelli was, ironically, one of the smallest margins of the season until that point, evidencing a concrete advance in the tuning for sprint conditions. From the technical point of view, Miami also exposed one of Ferrari's structural dilemmas. His car does not tolerate deviations in the aerodynamic charge strategy. Unlike McLaren or Mercedes, which seem to have developed cars with a solid aerodynamic base and a more neutral behavior, Ferrari continues to depend on excess of finding a sweet spot too narrow. This forces the team to commit to configurations that prioritize stability in medium curve, but that penalize in traction or degradation. In a layout like Miami with aggressive braking areas and high-speed transitions, the SF25 sailed on a technical tightrope that few equipment would be willing to walk. The merit of the pilots was double. They not only extracted performance but minimized errors in a sprint format that punishes the slightest slip. What Ferrari demonstrated in Miami is that it has a development base that could be useful if stabilized. The team managed to adjust the front refusal balance in the ideal window for the circuit and, although the car is still sensitive to the asphalt temperature, this result suggests that the aerodynamic updates implemented begin to bear fruit. Unlike what happened in Bahrain, where the new pieces broke the balance, here the team succeeded with the development directorate. And yet, despite these advances, the threat of irregularity remains latent. A good Friday does not guarantee a good Sunday, and Ferrari knows it better than anyone. The key now is not only to understand why it worked in Miami, but to replicate it in circuits of different characteristics. Because if something has shown this season, a car that depends on ideal conditions to shine cannot aspire to the championship. The real challenge begins when the asphalt does not help, when the wind changes and when the rain falls without warning. That's where the titles are built. And that's where Ferrari still has much to demonstrate. The 2025 season is not giving anyone. What used to be a championship where the teams had time to evolve, adapt and correct the course, is now a war from the first curve of the first Grand Prix. In this brutally demanding context, Ferrari not only competes against his rivals, but against the speed of change. And that change in Formula One is measured in tenths by return that can mean titles or irrelevance. The problem facing Ferrari is not only the immediate performance of the SF25, but the speed of progress of others. McLaren, for example, has started the season with a technical forcefulness that was not seen since his golden years. With an aggressively developed car from its winning base of 2024, the MCL39 has positioned itself as the most complete car of the grill. The combination of stable aerodynamics, load capacity and tire management allows them to compete at the highest level in circuits of very different characteristics. Norris leads the championship and Piastri remains a constant threat. And the most dangerous thing about McLaren is that they are not only performing, they are evolving. Every weekend they bring updates and their engineers are optimizing each critical area of the car without compromising reliability. Mercedes, who seemed to have stagnated after years of struggle with failed concepts, has resurfaced strongly. George Russell has assumed the natural leadership of the team and Kimi Antonelli, the young debutante, has broken all the schemes with a lightning adaptation. What was once a weakness is now an internal source of trust. The new W15 is not the best car in any specific area, but it is consistently strong in varied conditions, which allows them to add methodically. To this is added a stable internal structure, with Toto Wolff promoting a culture that prioritizes data analysis, decision-making without panic and sustained development. Even Red Bull, despite an internal institutional storm that includes divisions of power, rumors of Verstappen escape and radical decisions regarding its pilots, is still a contender. The RB21 has shown vulnerabilities, especially in slow curves and in rear load balance, but Max Verstappen continues to be a decisive factor. He has won races even when the car did not seem the strongest, and that is an advantage that few teams can replicate. Beside him, the drama for the degradation of Liam Lawson and the accelerated ascent of Yuki Tsunoda exposes a fragile structure, but with resources to react with a speed that Ferrari has not proven to have. In this excessive competition environment, Ferrari runs the real risk of being trapped in anyone's land. Your car has flashes but not consistency. Your pilots have talent but not a reliable tool. And its technical structure has knowledge, but not enough agility to adapt to the speed with which the current Formula One moves. While their rivals refine every detail and optimize every second in boxes, Ferrari continues to depend on finding that perfect weekend in which everything works. Something that, with this calendar so tight and the new sprint weekend format, is increasingly unlikely. The threat of lagging behind is not an exaggeration. It is a concrete possibility. If Ferrari does not capitalize on the favorable circuits, if it does not introduce technical solutions that stabilize the SF25 under different conditions, if it does not optimize the relationship between its pilots and the engineers, it will be again condemned to fight for crumbs instead of championships. Because in 2025, it is not enough to have a fast car sometimes. It is always necessary to have it. It is necessary to be perfect when everyone else has already approached dangerously to perfection. Ferrari is, once again, at the crossroads that each chapter of its recent history has defined. What seemed the beginning of a new era, with the arrival of a 7-times champion like Lewis Hamilton and a car designed from scratch to break with the limitations of the past, has resulted in a struggle for survival in the elite of Formula One. It is not enough to show flashes in classification or have promising partials in training. It is not enough to have talent in the steering wheel or promises in the factory. The current Formula One does not expect anyone. And Ferrari, if you intend to aspire to more than anecdotes, need to stop looking for validation in circumstantial actions and begin to build dominance from consistency. This is not a problem of a pilot or a particular track. It is a systemic pattern. Ferrari is still tied to an approach that depends too much on the surgical precision of each element, without the margin of tolerance that other teams have developed. SF25 can be competitive, but only under very specific circumstances. And that doesn't win championships. A team that really wants to return to the top needs to be feared for its reliability, respected for its adaptation, and admired for its constant progress. Ferrari today still does not meet any of those conditions fully. Hamilton's arrival represents a unique opportunity. He is a pilot who has proven to adapt, evolve, and push his environment towards excellence. But even he, with all his history and experience, needs a car to work with, a solid base, and a real hunger team of revolution. If Ferrari intends to make this project more than a recycled illusion story, it has to make brave structural decisions. Decisions that bother, that challenge the old ways, that break with that tradition of justifying stagnation with promises of the future. The big question that opens is inevitable. Are we facing a process of legitimate construction of Ferrari, or simply seeing another cycle of self-deception that will end in frustration? Is Hamilton the spark that can light a real transformation, or will end up being another illustrious name caught in red inertia? Now I want to know what you think. Do you trust that Ferrari will find the way before it is too late? Do you think this team has what is necessary, not only in talent but in technical culture, to really fight McLaren, Mercedes, and Red Bull during this season?